A beautiful waitress spills coffee on her first day and hears, "To my office now," but she didn't know that the millionaire was hopelessly in love with her. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The morning sun of March promised another scorching day in New York City when Emily Johnson adjusted her black blazer for the 10th time, which she had bought on sale specifically for this moment. At 28 years old, she had never set foot in a corporate building on Wall Street, and the grandeur of the Empire State Building made her feel even more out of place. Her hands trembled as she held the tray with 3 cups of espresso, a seemingly simple task that her supervisor, Ms. Celeste, had delegated as a baptism by fire for the new administrative assistant. "Take a deep breath, Emily. It's just coffee. You've served thousands of coffees at the college cafe," she murmured to herself while adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. The $4,500 she earned from this job represented more than double what she made at her previous 3 jobs combined. She could finally afford the hearing surgery that her 18-month-old daughter, Lily, desperately needed. The elevator rose silently to the 32nd floor, where the executive board of Johnson & Partners, one of the largest consulting firms in the country, was located. Emily observed her reflection in the polished elevator mirror. Brown hair tied in a low bun, discreet makeup applied with Avon products, and medium-heeled black shoes that already made her question her choice after 2 hours of wear. She didn't fit into that world of luxury, and she knew it. When the doors opened, Emily was greeted by a travertine marble hallway that echoed her nervous footsteps. Abstract paintings by renowned artists adorned the walls, and the subtle aroma of fine wood mingled with the expensive perfume that lingered in the air. Elegant secretaries typed silently on state-of-the-art computers, while impeccably dressed executives hurried by, carrying Italian leather briefcases. "Please, let me not mess this up," Emily thought, focusing on keeping the tray balanced as she followed Ms. Celeste's instructions. The first delivery would be to the Chief Financial Officer's office, then to the conference room, and finally, she swallowed hard, to the office of the Chief Executive Officer, David Johnson. The first 2 deliveries went off without a hitch. The executives barely lifted their eyes from their screens, murmuring an automatic "thank you" as she placed the cups on their desks. Emily began to relax, feeling that maybe she could survive her first day. It was then that she spotted the double wooden door at the end of the hallway with a golden plaque that read, "David Johnson, Chief Executive Officer." Her heart raced again. She had heard stories about the famous explosive temperament of the CEO, a 35-year-old man who had built a business empire after taking over his father's company and multiplying its revenue tenfold in less than a decade. Emily approached the door and, balancing the tray with one hand, gently knocked on the polished wood. "Come in," a deep male voice responded from the other side. She turned the doorknob and pushed the door open, immediately struck by the magnitude of the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, with the Appalachian Mountains in the background. A solid mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, surrounded by genuine leather armchairs. Bookshelves filled with administration and economics books stretched across an entire wall, while awards and certificates occupied another. David Johnson was facing away, speaking on the phone in fluent English with international investors. Emily could see his upright posture, broad shoulders shaped by a navy blue suit that surely cost more than her monthly salary. His black hair was perfectly styled, and even from behind, he radiated an authority that intimidated her. Emily carefully advanced through the room, her eyes glued to the Persian rug covering part of the wooden floor. The vibrant colors of the imported fabric told stories of distant places she would never know. She was so focused on not tripping that she didn't notice a small fold in the rug, a result of the morning cleaning. Her right foot snagged on the nearly imperceptible rise of the fabric, and the world seemed to slow down in that moment. The tray slipped from her hands as if it had a life of its own, describing a perfect arc in the air before spilling its entire contents onto the back of the most powerful man in the company. The silence that followed was deafening. David abruptly ended the call and turned slowly, like a predator assessing its prey. Emily felt the air escape her lungs as her eyes met his for the first time. They were dark brown eyes, almost black, staring at her with an intensity that made her tremble. But there was something more in that gaze, something she couldn't identify. For a fraction of a second, his expression seemed to change, as if he had seen a ghost. But the transformation was so quick that Emily thought she had imagined it. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Mr. Johnson." Emily stammered, her hands trembling as she bent down to pick up the shards of the broken cup. "It was an accident. I swear it was an accident." David remained motionless, coffee dripping down the back of his Italian suit as he watched her kneel on the floor. His jaw was tense, and Emily could see a vein pulsing in his forehead. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously low and controlled. "Forget that. Get up." Emily obeyed instantly, still holding fragments of porcelain in her trembling hands. Small cuts began to bleed on her fingers, but she barely noticed, hypnotized by David's piercing gaze. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice maintaining the same icy tone. "Emily Johnson, sir. It's my first day. First day," he repeated, as if the words had a bitter taste. "And you've already managed to ruin a suit that costs more than you earn in 3 months." The words were like slaps, and Emily felt tears burning in her eyes. She had worked so hard to get that opportunity, studied so much to be there. And now, in a matter of seconds, everything had crumbled. "Mr. Johnson, please," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "I need this job. I know I messed everything up, but I can make it up to you. I can pay for the suit even if it takes months. Please don't fire me." David studied her for a long moment, noticing how she held her head high even with tears threatening to fall. There was a dignity in her posture that intrigued him, a silent strength that contrasted with her apparent vulnerability. "To my office. Now," he finally said, his words cutting through the air like blades. Emily's heart sank. Those were the words every child feared to hear at school, that every employee dreaded to hear at work. It was the end. She had ruined everything before it even began. As she followed him to the conference room attached to his office, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Lily. How would she explain to her daughter that Mommy lost her job on the first day? How would she pay for medical appointments, for the surgery, for the rented apartment in a safe neighborhood far from the violence she knew from childhood? David closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched her with that unsettling intensity. "Tell me about yourself, Emily Johnson," he said, his voice losing some of its initial coldness. "Where did you come from? Why are you here?" The question caught her off guard. She expected to be fired on the spot, not interrogated. I graduated in business administration from NYU on a full scholarship," she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I worked 3 jobs during college to support myself. I took care of my grandmother until she passed away. Last year, I have a young daughter and she needs surgery. This job is my chance to give her what she deserves." David absorbed every word, his expression remaining unchanged, but internally a storm of emotions raged within him. That woman, there was something familiar about her, not just familiar, but deeply connected to a memory he cherished like a treasure. "Firing you would be the standard protocol," he finally said. "Destruction of company property, negligence on the first day of work." Emily closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. But, David continued, and she opened her eyes. Immediately, I will give you a chance to redeem yourself. Hope flared in Emily's chest like a lit candle in the dark. Anything, she said quickly. I will do anything. David approached the table and pulled out a thick folder, placing it in front of her. The company's anniversary party is in 2 weeks, 15 years of Johnson and Partners. It's an event that usually takes 3 months of planning, with a team of 5 people and a budget of $300,000. Emily swallowed hard. Where was this going? You will organize it alone, he said simply. If you succeed, you will keep your job and receive a promotion. If you fail... He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what the consequences would be. Emily looked at the folder, then at him, then back at the folder. It was an impossible mission, and they both knew it, but it was also her only chance. I accept, she said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. David nodded, an expression she couldn't decipher passing quickly across his face. Then I suggest you start immediately. You have 14 days to prove you deserve to be here. As Emily left his office carrying the folder that would determine her fate, David stood by the window, watching the frantic movement of the city below. His hands trembled slightly, a sign of emotion he didn't allow anyone to see. That woman, those green eyes, that sweet voice, even when she was terrified. He knew her. He was sure of it. And for the first time in months, the most feared businessman in New York City allowed himself to smile. 3 months before the spilled coffee, the sweltering heat of February turned the streets of Brooklyn into a bubbling cauldron of sweat, music, and joy. David Johnson walked through the narrow alleys of the bohemian neighborhood, his deliberately simple clothes, faded jeans, a white t-shirt, and sneakers, drastically contrasting with the tailored suits that made up his daily uniform. On that Saturday of Carnival, he was just another face in the crowd. "Are you sure you don't want me to go with you, David?" asked his best friend and partner Richard a few hours earlier. "Going out alone in the middle of this madness doesn't seem very safe for someone who has already had their picture on the cover of Forbes 3 times. "That's exactly why I need to go alone," David replied, adjusting the cap that partially hid his face. "When was the last time I could walk the streets of New York City without being recognized, without someone wanting to talk about business or ask for favors?" The truth was more complex than he admitted. In recent weeks, family pressure had intensified to an almost unbearable level. His father, Anthony Johnson, a 70-year-old patriarch with rigid ideas about tradition and family continuity, had begun to speak openly about arranged marriages, business succession, and responsibilities to the Johnson bloodline. With each family dinner, with each business meeting, David felt the walls of his gilded life closing in around him. At 35, he had built an empire. He had taken over his father's small consulting firm at 25 when Anthony suffered a heart attack and transformed it into a powerhouse in the American market. But success had a price. Loneliness, constant distrust about the true intentions of people around him. He felt surrounded by a growing sensation that he was living in a glass dome, watching real life happen outside. That's how he found himself lost in the streets of Brooklyn, surrounded by carnival blocks that seemed to sprout from every corner. The sound of drums echoed off the colorful brownstones, mingling with laughter, animated conversations, and the rustling of extravagant costumes. David tried to follow the street signs, but the number of masked, costumed, and intoxicated people made navigation nearly impossible. "Excuse me," he said to a group of young people dressed as superheroes. "Do you know how to get to the Brooklyn subway station?" "Dude, you're really lost," laughed one of the guys, clearly already drunk. "Look, go that way, turn right, then left. Actually, it's better if you ask someone." "Sober?" David thanked him and continued walking, feeling increasingly disoriented. The streets of the neighborhood formed an organic maze that seemed to have been designed by someone under the influence of hallucinogenic substances, and the carnival crowd only intensified his confusion. That's when he bumped into a young woman carrying two small children, one in her arms and the other by the hand. She wore a simple mermaid costume with a shiny green and blue fabric skirt that danced with her movements, and a crown of natural flowers framing her loose hair. Even with her face partially covered by a sequined mask, David could see that her eyes were a deep green, the color of tropical seas. "Sorry," he said quickly, extending his hand to help her regain her balance. "I didn't hurt you, did I?" "Not at all, it's fine," she replied, smiling in a way that made her dimples appear. "Actually, it looks like you're more lost than a kid in a theme park. Need help?" The ease with which she spoke surprised him. There was no exaggerated deference, no tense body language that people usually adopted when they recognized him. She simply treated him like a normal human being. "Very lost," he admitted, laughing for the first time in weeks. "I'm trying to get to the subway, but these streets seem to have a life of their own." "Oh, Brooklyn is like that," she said, adjusting the child in her arms. "It's like the streets move on purpose to confuse the unsuspecting. I can show you the way if you want. I'm heading that direction anyway." As they walked, David discovered that her name was Emily, though he hadn't asked for her last name, and that she worked as a waitress in a cafe in downtown New York City to pay for her business administration studies, and that the children weren't hers, but belonged to a neighbor who had fallen ill and asked her to take them to see the kids' parade. "You study business administration?" David asked, genuinely interested. "Which college?" "NYU," she replied, a hint of pride in her voice, "with a full scholarship. It's not easy to juggle work, studies, and still take care of my grandma, but it's what we do, right? Everyone has their challenges." There was a lightness in the way she spoke about difficulties that David didn't recognize in his own world. In his experience, people always dramatized minor problems or, conversely, hid real struggles to maintain appearances. Emily seemed simply authentic. "And you?" she asked as they sidestepped a group of clowns juggling. "What do you do? By the way you're dressed, I bet it's something creative. Designer? Musician?" David hesitated for a moment. "I work in business consulting," he finally said, opting for a half-truth. "How fancy," she laughed. "It must be interesting to help companies get organized better. I sometimes imagine what it would be like to work in one of those giant buildings on Wall Street, you know? It must be a completely different world." "It is different, yes," David agreed, without specifying whether the difference was good or bad. "But sometimes you wonder if all that pressure, all that artificiality is worth it." Emily looked at him more closely. "You speak like someone who knows that world well." "Maybe," he said, diverting his gaze to a group of percussionists rehearsing on a corner. "And you? Don't you want to work for a big company after you graduate?" "I do," she admitted, "but not for the reasons most people think. It's not for the status or the money, though. Money is important when you have responsibilities. It's because I believe I can make a difference, that I can help humanize those corporate environments, you know. Show that efficiency doesn't have to mean coldness." They continued talking as they navigated the crowded streets. David learned that she had lost her parents in a car accident when she was 15, that she was raised by a loving but strict grandmother who saved every penny to have her own house one day. Emily, in turn, learned that he often felt lonely despite his professional success, that he loved classical music but never had time to go to concerts, that he dreamed of traveling to places where no one knew who he was. "Have you ever thought about just disappearing for a while?" she asked, when he mentioned his desire for anonymity. "Grab a backpack and go somewhere where no one knows you." "Every day," he replied honestly, "but it's complicated when you have responsibilities, people who depend on you." Everyone has people who depend on them, Emily said gently. The difference is that some people think they're indispensable, when in fact the world keeps turning without them. Sometimes we free ourselves when we stop trying to control everything. Her words hit him with unexpected force. How many times had he used responsibilities as an excuse not to question whether he was really living or just surviving? When they finally arrived at the subway station, David realized he didn't want that encounter to end. There was something about Emily, her spontaneity, her unpretentious wisdom, her ability to see him as a person and not as... Eduardo felt a social position that made him feel alive in a way he had forgotten was possible. "Thank you so much," he said, hesitating before asking the burning question in his throat. "Maybe we could—" "Emily! Emily!" a female voice shouted from the crowd. A young woman dressed as a pirate rushed toward him. "I finally found you. Ms. Rosa is feeling better and wants to pick up the girls, and the block party on our street is starting in half an hour." Emily turned to David with an apologetic smile. "I have to go. It was really nice to meet you." "David," he said, realizing they had talked for almost 2 hours without exchanging full names. "David," she repeated as if testing the sound of his name. "I hope you find your deserted beach one day." And then she was gone, swept away by her friend in the opposite direction, the children waving at him over her shoulder. David stood at the subway entrance, watching her figure disappear into the colorful crowd, feeling as if a fundamental part of himself had been ripped away. In the following days, he found himself constantly thinking about her. He discreetly searched for Emily among the cafe staff in the city center, even hiring private investigators to try to locate her. But New York City was a megacity of 12 million inhabitants, and he had only a first name and a college to work with. Weeks turned into months, and gradually David accepted that their magical encounter had been just that: ephemeral magic, impossible to capture or repeat. But the memory of Emily, her genuine laughter, and her vibrant green eyes remained like a beacon in his increasingly mechanical existence. Until that March morning, when she appeared in his office carrying a tray of coffee, and his entire world instantly reorganized around that impossible revelation. The woman he had fallen hopelessly in love with during 2 hours of carnival was now his employee, and she clearly had no idea who he really was. Emily spent the first night after the coffee disaster awake until 3 in the morning, sprawled on the floor of her small apartment in East Harlem, surrounded by piles of papers, notepads, and a calculator that had belonged to her grandmother. The folder David had given her contained enough information to organize the World Cup, not just a corporate party, a list of 400 VIP guests, including ministers, ambassadors, and CEOs of the largest companies in the country, specific requirements for imported flowers, French wines, and a menu crafted by a renowned chef. A schedule of cultural presentations that included a string quartet, an international DJ, and a contemporary dance performance. Lily slept peacefully in the makeshift crib in the next room, occasionally emitting little sounds that made Emily's heart tighten. Her daughter had been born with a severe hearing impairment that could be surgically corrected, but the procedure cost $45,000, an amount that seemed further away than the moon before this job appeared like a miracle. "My God, Lily, what has your mother gotten into?" Emily murmured, looking over the list of recommended suppliers. Each name represented companies she had never dreamed of contacting, catering services that charged $100 per person, florists that imported Japanese orchids, sommeliers who earned more in one night than she did in 3 months. The phone rang at 6 in the morning, pulling her from the restless sleep she had managed among the scattered notes. "Emily, this is Ms. Celeste. I hope I didn't wake the little one." No, she's still sleeping," Emily replied, trying to sound awake. Miss Celeste was her supervisor, a woman in her 50s who had worked at the company since its founding and knew every secret of the corporate routine. "Girl, I heard what happened yesterday. Dr. David called me personally to explain the situation." Celeste's voice carried a mix of concern and disbelief. "In 15 years working here, I've never seen him give a second chance to someone who made that kind of accident." "Ms. Celeste, do you think I have any chance of organizing this party?" Emily asked, vulnerability seeping through her voice. There was a long pause before the response. "Look, dear, I won't lie to you. What he's asking for is, let's say, challenging. But there's one thing about Dr. David that you need to understand. He doesn't waste time on people he doesn't believe in. If he gave you this opportunity, it's because he saw something in you." After hanging up, Emily made coffee, the same artisanal blend she had brought from a small town in Pennsylvania, and began the strategy she had learned over the years of juggling multiple jobs, breaking the impossible into small, manageable tasks. The first step was to personally visit each supplier on the list. Emily quickly discovered that mentioning the name Johnson and Partners opened doors that would typically remain closed to someone like her. The prestige of the firm acted as a master key in the world of corporate events in New York City. "Are you new to Dr. David's team?" asked Ms. Francis, the owner of the most exclusive flower shop on the Upper East Side, scrutinizing Emily from head to toe with a critical eye. "He usually sends Sarah or Jessica for these negotiations." "I am new, yes," Emily confirmed, straightening her shoulders and keeping her voice steady. "Dr. David has given me full autonomy for the event decisions." Throughout the first week, Emily worked 18 hours a day. She woke up at 5 in the morning to feed Lily and prepare her to stay with Ms. Constance, the retired neighbor who had offered to care for the child in exchange for help with her monthly shopping. In the office, she arrived before everyone else and left after the nightly cleaning crew, transforming her desk into a command center filled with fabric samples, menus, photos of floral arrangements, and detailed schedules. It was during one of those lonely nights that David appeared for the first time. Emily was on the 19th floor, in her department, testing different lighting combinations for the presentation she would give the next morning. The building was completely empty, except for the night security guards, and she had lost track of time for hours. "Still working?" The male voice made her jump from her chair, knocking some candy samples to the floor. David was standing at the entrance of the department, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up and his tie loosened. Even with a less formal appearance, he still radiated that authority that intimidated her. "Dr. David, I didn't know you were still at the company," Marina stammered, quickly bending down to pick up the scattered papers. "Let me help," he said, surprising her by kneeling down to gather some samples. Their hands brushed briefly as they both reached for the same paper, and Marina felt an electric current run through her arm. "Thank you," she murmured, avoiding looking directly into his eyes. David stood up and surveyed her workspace. It was organized with military precision, color-coded lists, detailed hour-by-hour schedules, budgets calculated down to the cents. In the center, a small thermos of coffee exuded the rich aroma he had begun to associate with that part of the building. "What coffee is this?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Oh, it's a special blend from my hometown," Marina replied, relaxing slightly. "A small town in Pennsylvania. My grandmother taught me how to choose the beans and roast them. I brought a few kilos when I moved to New York City." David nodded, pretending not to notice how her eyes lit up when she spoke about her grandmother. "May I?" Marina was momentarily speechless. The CEO of the company was asking to try her homemade coffee. "Of course, please!" She poured a small cup, watching nervously as he took a sip. David's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "It's excellent," he said. and Marina felt warmth spread through her chest. Much better than what they serve on the 32nd floor. They remained silent for a few moments, David observing her work while savoring the coffee. Marina tried to focus on her notes, but she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical presence. "How is it progressing?" he finally asked. "Well, I think," Marina replied, turning her laptop to show a complex spreadsheet. "I managed to negotiate better prices with almost all the suppliers. The menu is finalized, the decoration approved, the schedule set. I'm just waiting for the final confirmation from the string quartet. They have a concert on the same date, but I think we can make it work." David examined the spreadsheet with growing attention. The numbers were impeccable, the negotiations clearly favorable to the company, and the level of detail impressed even someone accustomed to the highest standards. "You reduced the budget by almost 20%, he noted, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice. "Yes, sir. I found that many suppliers were overcharging simply because they knew the company could afford it. I negotiated long-term partnerships in exchange for immediate discounts," Marina explained, gaining confidence as she spoke about her work. "And you achieved this in a week," David said, more to himself than to her. "Actually, it was 6 days," Marina corrected with a small smile. "There's still a whole week left." David watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher. There was something different in his gaze, an intensity that went beyond professional assessment. "Marina," he said, and the way he pronounced her name made something stir in her stomach. "May I ask why you needed this job so much?" The question caught her off guard. For a moment she considered giving a vague, professional answer, but the way he looked at her, with genuine interest, without judgment, made her lower her defenses. "My daughter," she said simply. "She has a hearing impairment that can be surgically corrected. The procedure costs $45,000. With this job, I can finance the surgery and still keep our apartment." David remained silent, absorbing the information. "How old is she?" 18 months, Marina replied, her face lighting up as it always did when she spoke of Lily. "She's an amazing girl, smart, determined. She's going to be a warrior just like her great-grandmother. The grandmother who raised you. Yes, Ms. Anita. She always said that it doesn't matter where you come from. It matters where you're going." Marina smiled at the memory. She would have loved to see her great-granddaughter grow up. David observed the mix of love and melancholy that passed over Marina's face. There was a strength in that woman that impressed him. Not the artificial strength of power or money, but something deeper, more real. "The event is going to be a success," he finally said, his voice filled with certainty. "Do you really think so?" Marina asked, vulnerability shining through her voice. "I know so," David replied, finishing the coffee. "Keep it up." As he walked back to the elevator, David tried to process the storm of emotions that Marina stirred in him. Every conversation, every gesture, every smile only confirmed what he had suspected since their first meeting at the carnival. She was extraordinary. And now, learning about her daughter, about the responsibilities she carried with such dignity, he found himself wanting to protect her, help her, make sure she never had to worry about money or bills again. But he knew that any premature gesture could destroy the fragile trust he was building between them. For now, all he could do was watch from afar as she proved, day after day, that she was so much more than he could have ever expected, and hope that when the party ended and she discovered who he really was, she would be able to forgive him for keeping the secret about their meeting at the carnival. The second week began with a call that made Marina's heart race at 6 in the morning. The string, the quartet that had confirmed their attendance, cancelled at the last minute. The first violinist had been hospitalized with acute appendicitis. and finding substitutes of the same level a week before the event seemed impossible. "Calm down, Marina. Take a breath," she said to herself as she rocked Lily, who was inconsolable after a restless night. The two had spent the night awake, the baby with a low fever, and Emily reorganizing the event schedule for the 100th time. Ms. Constance appeared at the door right at 7, as always, carrying a thermos of chamomile tea and her motherly smile. "Good morning, my dear. Has Lily improved?" "She's still a bit feverish, but I think it's just her teeth," Emily replied, handing her daughter over to the neighbor's arms. "Ms. Constance, if she gets worse, I'll call you immediately. Don't worry. Go to work peacefully. Grandma here will take care of everything," the lady said, already rocking Lily with the experience of having raised 5 children herself. The commute from East Harlem to Wall Street took 2 hours on public transport, time that Emily used to make calls and review notes. That particular morning, she called 17 different musical groups, all either booked or with prices far above the approved budget. "Emily, darling," Miss Celeste intercepted her as soon as she arrived at the building. "Dr. David wants to speak with you. Urgent." Emily's stomach dropped. Had he found out about the cancellation of the string quartet? Was this the reason they were ending her probation period a week early? In the elevator, she tried to mentally prepare for any scenario. Upon reaching the 32nd floor, she was greeted by Eduardo's personal secretary, an elegant middle-aged woman who observed her with barely concealed curiosity. "He's waiting," she simply said. Gesturing toward the mahogany door, Emily knocked gently and entered. Eduardo was on the phone, gesturing tensely while speaking in English with someone who was clearly irritating him. He gestured for her to sit and continued the conversation for a few more minutes. "Sorry," he said after hanging up, running his hands through his hair, causing a few strands to become disheveled. "Problems with international suppliers." Emily noticed he looked more tired than usual. There were subtle dark circles under his eyes, and his tie was slightly crooked, details that humanized his normally impeccable appearance. "Sir, I need to inform you about a complication," Emily began, deciding to be direct. "The string quartet cancelled this morning due to a medical emergency. I'm working to find substitutes, but—" "I know," Eduardo interrupted, surprising her. "Their manager called me personally to explain the situation, and I also know that you've contacted 17 different groups since 7 this morning." Emily stared at him, confused. "How do you—" "Because some of those musicians called me to confirm if the event really exists and if you have the authority to negotiate on behalf of the company," Eduardo explained with a small smile. Apparently, a very determined young woman was offering quite aggressive terms to secure last-minute availability. Emily's face flushed. I was trying to solve the problem without bothering you." "Emily," Eduardo said, leaning forward, "you are organizing the most important event on the company's calendar. Any problem is my problem too, and any solution you find has my full support." The sincerity in his voice reassured her slightly. "I found a chamber music group from NYU. They are young but extremely talented. The conducting professor assured me that the repertoire will be impeccable." "I trust your judgment," Eduardo said. "But that's not why I called you here." Emily waited, her heart racing again. "I want you to know that regardless of the outcome of the party, your performance so far has been exceptional," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Your dedication, your negotiation skills, your attention to detail, all of this goes far beyond what I expected." "Thank you, sir," Emily murmured, unsure how to interpret those words. "There's one more thing," Eduardo continued, hesitating for a moment. "My secretary mentioned that you've been staying in the office quite late, every day." "Yes, sir. It's necessary to ensure everything is perfect." "Emily," His voice softened. "You have a young daughter. Don't you think you should be home with her by 8 in the evening?" The question hit her like a punch in the stomach. It was exactly the guilt that consumed her every night, knowing that Lily was asleep when she got home, that she was missing precious moments of her daughter's growth in the name of that job. It's complicated," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to ensure everything goes perfectly. I can't let anyone down." Eduardo watched her for a long moment, noticing how she unconsciously twisted her hands when talking about pressure, how her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You've already impressed me," he said gently. "Now you need to trust yourself." There was a heavy silence between them. Emily felt a strange connection with this man, something that went beyond their professional relationship, but she couldn't identify or understand. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Eduardo suddenly said. Emily nodded, though the nervousness returned instantly. "Does the father of your daughter help in any way?" The question was like a stab. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, gathering courage to talk about the subject that hurt her the most. "No," she said simply. When he found out about the pregnancy, he said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he had other plans for his life. He offered money to resolve the situation. When I said I was going to have the baby anyway, he disappeared." Eduardo felt a cold fury spreading through his chest. How could someone abandon a woman like Emily? How could someone give up the chance to build a family with her? "I'm sorry," he said, and Emily realized that the sincerity in his voice was genuine. "You don't need to feel sorry," she replied, straightening her shoulders. "Lily and I are doing just fine on our own. In fact, we're better off alone. At least this way, I know I can count on myself." The words revealed more than Emily realized. Emily intended to talk about her emotional wounds, about the distrust she had developed towards men, especially those from high social classes. David absorbed every word, finally understanding why she kept such a careful distance from him, why there was an invisible barrier she erected whenever. The conversation became too personal. "Emily," he said, standing up and walking to the window, "have you ever thought that maybe you deserve more than just being okay alone?" The question caught her completely off guard. "I don't understand." David turned to face her. For a moment, Emily saw something in his eyes that made her completely forget she was talking to her boss. There was an intensity, a vulnerability that mirrored her own. "Nothing," he finally said, the professional mask returning to place. "I just think you are an extraordinary woman who deserves to be valued." Emily's heart raced. There was something in the way he looked at her, in the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, that awakened feelings she had buried long ago. "I need to get back to work," she murmured, standing up quickly. "Of course," David said, but he didn't move from the window. "Emily?" She paused at the door, not turning around. "If you need anything at all, my door will always be open." Emily nodded without looking back and left the room, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it from the other side of the door. While waiting for the elevator, she tried to process what had just happened. There was something happening between them, something that went far beyond their professional relationship. But that was impossible, dangerous, and potentially destructive to everything she had worked for. David Johnson was her boss, a powerful and wealthy man, exactly the type of person she had sworn to avoid after Rodrigo's betrayal. And even if he weren't, even if he were just an ordinary man interested in her, Emily couldn't afford to get romantically involved with anyone. She had a daughter to raise, a career to build, a life to reconstruct. But as she descended back to the 19th floor, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he had said her name, the sincerity in his voice when he asked about Lily, the feeling that, For the first time in 2 years, someone truly saw her as a whole person, not just as a single mother struggling to survive. And that scared her more than any deadline or tight budget ever could. The birthday party for Johnson and Partners was scheduled to start at 7 p.m. on a rainy Thursday in March. At 5 p.m., Emily was in the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, David's choice for its tradition and classic elegance, overseeing the final details with the precision of a general coordinating a battle. The round tables for 10 were strategically arranged throughout the ballroom, covered with raw linen tablecloths and centerpieces made of white orchids and green foliage that created a sophisticated atmosphere without being ostentatious. The indirect lighting, which she had tested 3 times during the week, bathed the room in golden tones that enhanced both the hotel's classic architecture and the carefully positioned floral arrangements. Emily, the catering. "Staff wants to speak with you about the canapés," said Julia, one of the waitresses Emily had personally met during the planning meetings. The young woman had been so impressed with Emily's organization that she offered to be her direct contact during the event. "I'll be right there," Emily replied, checking the list she had clipped to her clipboard one last time. Each item was marked with different colors: green for completed, yellow for in progress, red for urgent issues. Fortunately, only a few yellow items remained. The chamber music group from NYU was doing their final sound checks on the makeshift stage in the corner of the ballroom. The 5 young musicians, dressed in rented but impeccably presentable suits, played a piece by Vivaldi that echoed softly throughout the room. Emily smiled as she listened to them. Her gamble had paid off. "Miss Emily?" A male voice called her. She turned to find the hired sommelier, a middle-aged Frenchman with a worried expression. "Yes, Mr. Lawrence? We have a small problem with the wines. The Chateau Lafite that Mr. Johnson specifically requested for the final toast. The bottle arrived with a damaged label. Technically, the wine is perfect, but the presentation—" Emily took a deep breath. This was the kind of detail that could ruin the final impression of a perfect event. "Do we have any alternatives of the same quality?" "Yes, a Bordeaux of equivalent vintage. In fact, many consider it superior, but it wasn't Mr. Johnson's original choice." "Let me handle this," Emily said, grabbing her cell phone. It was 6:15. David should be arriving at the hotel any moment. She dialed his secretary's number. "Good evening, Ms. Carmen. This is Emily. Has Mr. David left the office yet?" "Good evening, dear. He left 15 minutes ago. He should be arriving shortly. Is there a problem?" "Nothing serious. Just a question about the wines I need to confirm with him." Emily hung up and tried to calculate if she could resolve the issue before the first guests arrived. That's when she heard a commotion at the entrance of the ballroom and turned to see David entering with a small group of people. He was wearing an impeccably tailored black tuxedo that highlighted his elegant posture. His hair was perfectly styled, and when his eyes scanned the room until they found her, Emily felt something stir. In her stomach, there was evident pride in his gaze as he observed the results of her work, but what caught her attention the most was the blonde woman by his side. She was stunning, wearing a navy blue evening gown that surely cost more than Emily's annual salary. Her jewelry was discreet, but clearly expensive, and the way she held Eduardo's arm suggested an intimacy that made Marina's heart sink. "Marina!" Eduardo approached with the group. "I want to introduce you to the board of directors. This is Emily Johnson, the one responsible for all this perfection you see." Marina smiled professionally as she greeted the grey-haired men that made up the board, but her eyes kept drifting back to the blonde woman, who was watching her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "And this is Beatrice Montgomery," Eduardo said as they reached her. "Beatrice, Emily." "Pleasure," Beatrice said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Eduardo told me about you, the young woman who organized all this by herself. Impressive." There was something in the woman's tone that unsettled Marina, but she maintained her polite smile. "Nice to meet you. Excuse me, I need to resolve an issue with the sommelier." Marina stepped away, pretending not to notice the piercing look Eduardo shot in her direction. She quickly resolved the wine issue, approving the substitution, and dove headfirst into the final preparations, trying to ignore Beatrice's presence next to Eduardo. The event started promptly at 7 o'clock. Guests arrived in small groups: influential business people, politicians, ambassadors, discreet celebrities. Marina recognized several faces from business and society magazines, people whose fortunes were counted in billions. She circulated through the hall all night, discreetly overseeing every detail. Whether the waiters were keeping the glasses full, whether the canapes were arriving at the tables at the ideal temperature, whether the music was at the perfect volume to allow conversations without drowning out the atmosphere. "Oh my, what a wonderful event," commented a minister's wife to Marina. "Everything is perfect, dear. Have you been working in events for a long time?" "Thank you. Actually, this is my first corporate event of this scale," Marina admitted, feeling a wave of genuine pride. During dinner, she remained in the kitchen with the catering team, coordinating the serving of the dishes. It was from there that she watched through the half-open door as Eduardo stood up to give his thank you speech. 15 years ago, his voice echoed through the hall. "My father handed me a small consulting firm and a piece of advice. Build something that lasts longer than you. Today, I can say that Johnson & Partners is not just a successful company, but a family." Marina watched as he commanded the attention of that powerful audience. There was a naturalness in his leadership that went beyond social position or wealth. It was genuine charisma, evident intelligence. "But tonight wouldn't be possible without someone very special," Eduardo continued, and Marina felt her heart race. "Emily Johnson, our newest collaborator, organized this event all by herself in just 2 weeks. Emily, where are you?" All heads turned, searching for her. Marina felt her face burn as she reluctantly stepped out of the kitchen, receiving warm applause from 400 important people. "This is the kind of talent and dedication that defines our company," Eduardo said, his eyes finding hers across the hall. "Emily, thank you for making this night unforgettable." The applause was deafening. Marina took a polite bow, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. When the applause died down and conversations resumed, she tried to return to the discretion of the kitchen, but was intercepted by dozens of guests wanting to compliment her. "My dear," said an elegant lady with white hair, "you have a gift for this. Have you thought about starting your own event planning company?" "Here's my card," said a businessman from the real estate sector. "When you decide to leave Johnson & Partners, reach out to me." Marina smiled politely at everyone, but her attention was divided. Across the hall, Eduardo was animatedly chatting with Beatrice and a group of international investors. The woman was visibly closer to him now, her hand possessively resting on his arm. It was at 10 o'clock that everything crumbled. Marina was supervising the distribution of desserts when she heard Beatrice speaking loudly with a group of high society women, clearly altered by the champagne consumed throughout the night. "Of course, Eduardo and I are getting back together. After 3 years apart, we finally realized we were made for each other. The wedding will be at the end of the year, obviously." The words hit Marina like a punch to the stomach. She leaned against the nearest wall, trying to process what she had just heard. "How romantic," sighed one of the women. "Did you date before?" "We dated for 2 years when we were younger," Beatrice continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "But you know how it is. Sometimes you need to explore other options before realizing that the right person was there all along." Marina felt nausea rising in her throat. Everything made sense now. Eduardo's intense looks, the personal conversations, the way he showed interest in her life. She had been nothing but a distraction, an interesting pastime for a bored man, while he sorted things out with his true choice. How had she been so naive? How had she allowed her feelings to develop for someone who was clearly out of her league? "Marina, are you okay?" Julia appeared at her side, concerned. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Marina lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired. It's been a long night." But she wasn't fine. She was devastated, humiliated, furious with herself for believing that someone like David Johnson could be genuinely interested in someone like her. Marina finished the night on autopilot, coordinating the cleanup, overseeing the dismantling of the decorations, ensuring everything was removed without damage. Eduardo approached her several times during the last hours, trying to strike up a conversation, but she kept her responses professional and distant. "Emily," he said when the hall was almost empty, "you did an extraordinary job tonight. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," she interrupted formally. "It was a pleasure working on this project. If you'll excuse me, I need to finish supervising the cleanup." Eduardo seemed confused by the sudden change in her demeanor, but as Emily was questioning, Beatrice appeared at her side. "David, dear, the chauffeur is waiting. Are you coming?" Emily watched the two leave together, Beatrice practically glued to his arm, and felt something die inside her chest. The next morning she typed her resignation letter. Emily's resignation letter was on David's desk at 8 in the morning on Friday, personally delivered by Ms. Celeste, who wore a perplexed expression on her face. "Mr. Johnson, she arrived before 7, left this here, and said she was serving her notice starting today," explained the supervisor, clearly confused. "I tried to talk to her, but she was different, closed off, you know. Very different from the cheerful girl I met in the last 2 weeks." David tore open the envelope with slightly trembling hands. The text was succinct, professional, cold. "Dear Mr. David Johnson, I hereby resign from my position as administrative assistant with a 30-day notice period as stipulated in my contract. I appreciate the opportunity given and am available for the transition of activities. Sincerely, Emily Johnson." There was no explanation, no personal justification, nothing but the bureaucratic coldness that drastically contrasted with the warm woman he had known. David picked up the internal phone immediately. "Celeste, please ask Emily to come up here. Now." "Sir, she is no longer in the building. She said she would return on Monday to organize the transition." David hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair, trying to understand what had happened. The night before, Emily had been celebrated by 400 VIP guests, publicly recognized for her exceptional talent. Hours later, she was handing in her resignation. Something had happened during the party, something he had completely missed. Over the weekend, David found himself obsessively thinking about what could have caused the radical change in Emily's behavior. He mentally reviewed every interaction they had during the party, every exchanged word, every glance. But nothing explained the transformation of a radiant and proud woman into someone who submitted a resignation without explanations. On Monday, he had been waiting in the office since 7 in the morning. Emily arrived promptly at 8, wearing a discreet grey suit that made her seem almost invisible. She politely greeted Miss Celeste and headed straight to her desk, completely ignoring the congratulations from colleagues who wanted to commend her for the success of the party. David waited until 10 o'clock before going down to the 19th floor personally. "Emily, I need to talk to you." She looked up from the documents she was organizing, and David felt a tightness in his chest at the coldness that had replaced the warmth he had always found in her gaze. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. About the transition of activities." "I do not accept your resignation," he said directly. "With all due respect, sir, it is not a matter of acceptance. It is my decision, Emily replied, returning her attention to the papers. Emily, at least tell me why. On Thursday you were radiant, proud of the exceptional work you did. On Friday you submit your resignation. What happened? Emily stopped writing but did not look up. Nothing happened. I simply realized that this is not the right opportunity for me. That is a lie, David said, his voice heavy with frustration. Something happened during the party. What was it? Finally, Emily met his gaze, and he saw something in her eyes that made him instinctively pull back. It was not just coldness. It was a deep pain mixed with something that looked very much like disappointment. Mr. Johnson, she said, her voice controlled but tense. I appreciate the opportunity, but I have already secured another job. I will be working at Events & Co., a smaller company that is more suited to my profile. The way she said profile carried a bitterness that David did not understand. Emily, please. If you'll excuse me, I need to finish organizing the files, she interrupted, returning to work with a determination that made it clear the conversation was over. David stood there for a few more seconds, watching the woman he had fallen in love with work with a mechanical efficiency that was far from the passion she had shown in the previous weeks. When he realized she was not going to say anything more, he left, feeling more confused and frustrated than he had ever felt in his entire business career. In the following days, David tried in various ways to change Emily's mind. He offered an immediate promotion, a significant salary increase, even the creation of an events department specifically for her to manage. All offers were politely but firmly declined. Mr. Johnson, Ms. Celeste said on Wednesday, may I say something, as an older woman? Of course, Celeste. That girl is suffering. I don't know what happened, but it has to do with the heart, not with work. And when a woman is protecting her heart, offering money or a position doesn't help. Celeste's words echoed in David's mind throughout the week. Heart. Could it be that Emily had developed feelings for him, just as he had for her? And if so, what could have happened to hurt her so deeply? On Friday, Emily's last day at the company, David went down to the 19th floor one last time. Emily. She was packing her few personal belongings into a small box. When she saw him, she sighed like someone who was tired of fighting. Mr. Johnson, at least let me thank you properly for what you did, he said, extending an envelope. It's a bonus for the event. You deserve it. Emily looked at the envelope as if it were something toxic. I don't need it. I did the work I was hired for. Emily, please, at least accept this. I don't want your charity, she said, and there was a wound in her voice that made David understand he had touched on something much deeper than professional pride. It's not charity, he said gently. It's recognition for merit. Emily stared at him for a long moment, and David saw unshed tears shining in her eyes. Mr. Johnson, she finally said, I know that for people like you, people like me are fleeting. I understand that, but you don't have to pretend it was more than it was. People like me, people like you, what are you talking about? Emily picked up the box with her belongings and headed for the door. Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you much success in your marriage. And then she left, leaving David completely perplexed. Marriage? What marriage was she talking about? It was only late in the afternoon that the realization hit him. David called Rick desperate. Rick, you need to tell me exactly what Beatrice said at the party on Thursday. David, man, you were there. Why? Just tell me. Rick sighed. Well, she was a bit tipsy from the champagne and was telling her friends that you two were getting back together, that you were getting married at the end of the year. Man, I thought she was joking. You're not getting back together with Beatrice, are you? David closed his eyes, feeling a mix of fury and despair. No, I never was. And I Never will be. Then why didn't you deny it right away? Because I didn't hear. I was talking to the German investors the whole party. David ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. My God, Rick. Emily heard that and thought, oh man. Rick's voice was heavy with understanding. Emily, the assistant who organized the party? Yes. David, you're in love with her. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. I am, David admitted, saying out loud for the first time something he had known for weeks. And she just left my life because she thinks I'm going to marry someone else. David tried to contact Emily all weekend. He called the cell number listed on her employee file, but found it had been disconnected. He even went to her address in East Harlem, but the doorman said she had moved without leaving a new address. It was as if Emily Johnson had simply vanished from his life in the same mysterious way she had appeared in it. For the next 2 months, David threw himself into work with an intensity that even worried his closest colleagues. He arrived at the office at 6 in the morning and left after midnight, taking on every possible professional commitment, traveling for meetings he could easily have resolved via video conference. But nothing could erase the memory of Emily from the first sips of coffee he took in the morning, always hoping to find that special aroma she brewed. Nothing could make him stop looking for brown hair and green eyes in every crowd he passed through. Emily, in turn, had settled into Events & Co., a family-run company in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, with only 12 employees and a completely different philosophy from the corporation she had left behind. There, she was treated like family by the owners, a middle-aged couple who had started the business organizing Sweet 16 parties at the local community center. The salary was lower, but the welcoming environment and absence of rigid hierarchies allowed Emily to get home every day at 6 in the evening to have dinner with Lily. For the first time since her daughter was born, she was able to follow every little development. The first wobbly steps, the first words, the smiles that lit up any tough day. "Emily, dear," said Miss Rosa, the owner of the company, one May afternoon, "we received an interesting invitation. The Ritz-Carlton wants us to organize a corporate event for international investors. It's a big job, well paid." Emily took the proposal and felt her heart race when she read the name of the contracting company, Johnson & Partners. "Miss Rosa," she said with her voice carefully controlled, "I think it's better if you assign someone else to this project." "Why?" "It's exactly the kind of event you're an expert in." Emily couldn't explain that the mere possibility of running into David terrified her, not after spending 2 months trying to forget the way he looked at her, the way his voice softened when they talked about personal things, the way she had felt special and valued for the first time in years. "It's just that I worked for them before. I prefer not to mix the past with the present." Ms. Rosa looked at her with the wisdom of someone who had raised 3 daughters. "Emily, my dear, sometimes fate puts people back in our path for a reason. Maybe it's time for you to face that past instead of running from it." And so, against all her instincts of self-preservation, Emily accepted to organize an event where she knew she would encounter the man who had managed to shake all the defenses she had built around her heart. The Ritz-Carlton was being prepared to host an international conference on corporate sustainability when Emily arrived on Monday morning, carrying her familiar clipboards and a steely determination to keep everything strictly professional. She had spent the entire weekend mentally preparing for the possibility of seeing David, rehearsing formal responses and building emotional barriers she hoped would be impenetrable. "Good morning, Emily," greeted the hotel's event manager, a stylish man named Alessandro, whom she had met during the Johnson & Partners anniversary party. "What a pleasure to work with you again. The March event was talked about for months here at the hotel." "Thank you, Alessandro. Let's make another exceptional event." Emily replied with the professional smile she had perfected in recent weeks. The event was scheduled for Wednesday night and would be smaller than the previous party. Only 150 guests, including European, Asian, and American investors considering sustainable projects in Brazil. Emily dove into work, coordinating suppliers, overseeing the thematic decoration that included native Brazilian plants and reforested wood elements. It was on Tuesday afternoon that it happened. Emily was in the main hall testing the sound system when she heard a familiar voice talking to Alessandro in the hallway. Her heart raced immediately, and she hid behind. David leaned against one of the decorative pillars, trying to calm himself. "I want to make sure everything will be perfect for our international guests," he was saying. "This conference is crucial for our new investments in green technology." "You can be sure, Mr. Johnson. In fact, we have the same event planner from the March party. Emily Johnson, you should remember her." There was a pause that seemed to last an eternity. "Emily is organizing this event?" David's voice carried a mix of surprise and something that Emily couldn't quite identify. "Yes, sir. She now works for Events & Co., an exceptional professional." Emily closed her eyes, gathering courage. She couldn't hide forever. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from behind the pillar, walking towards the corridor with an upright posture and controlled expression. "Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson," she said when the two men spotted her. David stared at her as if he had seen a ghost. He looked thinner than she remembered, with subtle, dark circles suggesting sleepless nights, but he still radiated that presence that made her heart race involuntarily. "Emily," he said, his voice hoarse, "I didn't know you were involved in this project." "Events & Co. was hired by the production company responsible," she explained formally. "I hope that's not a problem." "Of course not," David replied quickly, but Emily noticed how his hands clenched into discreet fists at his sides. "I'm sure you'll do an excellent job as always." Alessandro looked from one to the other, clearly sensing the tension in the air. "Well, I'll leave you to discuss the final details. Emily, reach out to me if you need anything." Once they were alone in the corridor, an awkward silence settled between them. Emily kept her eyes fixed on her clipboard, pretending to review notes she already knew by heart. "How are you?" David finally asked. "Well, thank you," she replied without looking up. "And your daughter? How is Lily?" Emily felt a pang in her chest, realizing he remembered her daughter's name. "She's well, growing up fast." "The surgery, were you able to go through with it?" The question caught her off guard, and Emily finally met his gaze. There was genuine concern in his eyes that disarmed her momentarily. "Yes," she said softly. "Last month. It was a success." The relief that washed over David's face was so evident that Emily felt her determination to keep distance waver. "I'm very glad to hear that," he said sincerely. "Very glad indeed." Another silence fell, filled with unspoken words and unresolved tension. "Emily, I need to explain about that night," David began. "You don't need to explain anything," she interrupted quickly. "Water under the bridge. If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to work." Emily stepped away. Before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it echoing through the marble corridor. For the rest of Tuesday and all of Wednesday, Emily managed to avoid further encounters with David, obsessively focusing on every detail of the event. When the night of the conference arrived, she was prepared for yet another performance of impeccable professionalism. The event was running perfectly. The international guests praised both the organization and the presentation on sustainable projects. Emily moved around the hall with her usual efficiency, always careful to keep her distance from the table where David was meeting with investors. It was at 10 o'clock that everything changed. A typical tropical storm for January, though it was May, the New York City weather seemed to have its own rules, suddenly unleashed its fury on the city. Within minutes, the wind and rain intensified to the point of making the hotel windows shake. "Emily!" Alessandro shouted, running toward her. "We have a serious problem. The rain is coming in through the ceiling of the secondary hall where we set up the green technology exhibition. It's flooding everything." Emily rushed to the hall and found chaos. Water was pouring through a crack in the ceiling that the wind pressure had widened, soaking expensive displays, computers, and informational panels. If they didn't act quickly, the entire exhibition would be destroyed. "We need to move everything to the main hall," she said quickly, already taking off her high-heeled shoes to work better. "Call all available waiters. We're going to form a human chain." For the next 40 minutes, Emily coordinated an emergency operation involving hotel staff, waiters, and even some guests who volunteered to help. She was completely soaked, her hair plastered to her face and her professional dress ruined, but shouting precise instructions to save equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was in the midst of this frenzy that David appeared, also drenched, carrying one of the heavier panels. "Where's this going?" he asked, lacking any trace of the formality that had marked their previous interactions. "North wall of the main hall," Emily replied automatically, before realizing she was working side by side with him, as if they were long-time partners. For the next hour, they worked together with a natural synchronicity that surprised them both. David followed her instructions without question, carrying the heaviest equipment, helping to reorganize the entire exhibition in the new space. When one of the more sophisticated computers began to malfunction after getting wet, Emily improvised a solution using hairdryers she borrowed from the hotel spa. "How did you know that would work?" David asked, impressed as he watched the equipment come back to life. "I worked 3 years in a computer store during college," Emily replied, focused on adjusting the settings. "I learned a lot about water emergencies." When they finally managed to re-establish the entire exhibition in the main hall, it was already past midnight. The storm had subsided, leaving only the soft sound of rain against the windows. The international guests were impressed not only with the quality of the presentation, but also with the efficiency of the emergency operation they had witnessed. Emily was exhausted, soaked, and with sore feet, but radiant with the success of the event. Recovery. It was then that she realized that she and David were alone in the secondary hall, checking to see if anything important had been left behind. "Emily," he said, stopping in the middle of the empty hall. "We need to talk. Mr. Johnson, it's almost 1 in the morning. I don't think—" "Please," he interrupted, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made her stop. "Just 5 minutes." Emily hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. "First, I want you to know that there was never anything between me and Beatrice," David said directly. "What she said at the party was her fantasy. We dated briefly years ago, but there was never any plan for marriage." Emily stared at him, trying to process the information. "Why would she say something like that?" "Because she has expectations that I never met, and because that night she was trying to mark her territory." "Territory?" Emily asked, confused. David took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep waters. "Emily, do you remember the carnival in Brooklyn? A young woman dressed as a mermaid helped a lost man find his way to the subway." Emily's heart stopped for a moment. "How do you—" "It was me," he said simply. "The lost man was me. And since that day, I never stopped looking for you." Emily sat heavily in one of the remaining chairs in the hall, trying to absorb the revelation that completely reorganized everything she thought she knew about the last few months. You knew who I was when I spilled the coffee. I recognized you right away," David confirmed, "but you clearly didn't recognize me, and I didn't know how to approach the subject without seeming intrusive or scary." Emily ran her hands over her wet face, trying to sort her thoughts. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I realized that you developed a natural aversion to rich men after what happened with Lily's father," David said gently. "And because I wanted you to know me as a person, not as a position or wealth." They remained silent for long minutes, the weight of the revelations hanging between them like a tangible presence. "Emily," David finally said, "I fell in love with you twice. First, for a woman with a genuine smile who helped me when I was lost. Then, for the dedicated professional, the loving mother, the whole person you showed yourself to be every day." Emily felt tears burning her eyes. "David, I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I just needed you to know the truth, that it was never a game for me, that you were never just a distraction." Emily looked at him across the dim hall, finally seeing not the powerful and intimidating CEO, but the vulnerable man who had gotten lost in the streets of Brooklyn and found something precious he didn't even know he was looking for. "I recognized you too," she whispered, "from the very first moment, but I thought you would never remember me." The words hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities and dangers, promises and fears. And for the first time since that emotionally stormy night at the March party, Emily allowed her defenses to lower enough to see that maybe, just maybe, some stories deserved a second chance. David's revelation about the carnival changed everything, and paradoxically, further complicated the situation between them. In the days following the hotel event, Emily found herself battling an internal storm of contradictory emotions. On one hand, knowing that he had searched for her, that their magical encounter had been as meaningful for him as it was for her, warmed her heart in a way she had forgotten was possible. On the other hand, the practical reality of their different lives remained an apparently insurmountable chasm. "Mommy, are you sad?" asked Lily one Saturday morning, her small hands touching Emily's face with the unique sensitivity of children to sense adult moods. "No, my love," Emily lied, forcing a smile as she prepared the oatmeal that had become her daughter's favorite breakfast. "Mommy is just tired from work." But the truth was that Emily had barely slept in recent weeks. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the conversation at the hotel, the vulnerability in David's gaze when he confessed to searching for her, the sincerity in his voice when he said he had fallen in love twice with the same person. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Ms. Rosa. "Emily, dear, I have an interesting proposal for you. A businessman wants to meet with us on Monday to discuss starting an independent event planning company. He seems very impressed with your work at the hotel." Emily's heart raced with a terrible suspicion. "Which businessman, Ms. Rosa?" "David Johnson, from Johnson & Partners. Didn't you mention you already knew him?" Emily closed her eyes, feeling a mix of frustration and something dangerously close to hope. "Ms. Rosa, I can't accept this meeting." "Why, my daughter? It's an incredible opportunity." "It's complicated," Emily sighed. "Very complicated." On Monday, despite her protests, Emily found herself sitting in the conference room of Events & Co. alongside Ms. Rosa and her husband, Mr. Antonio, waiting for David. When he entered, wearing a dark grey suit that accentuated his eyes, she felt her heart race, as it always did in his presence. "Good afternoon," he greeted formally, but Emily noticed how his gaze lingered on her for a fraction of a second before turning to the company's owners. David presented his proposal with the precision of someone used to closing million-dollar deals. He wanted to invest in creating a new company specializing in high-level corporate events, with Emily as the managing partner. The initial investment would be $500,000. She would have 40% of the shares and total autonomy to hire staff and define strategies. "It's too generous of a proposal," Emily said as soon as David finished the presentation. "Too suspicious." "Emily," Ms. Rosa reprimanded, clearly impressed with the numbers presented. "No, she is right to question," David said calmly. "It's a risky proposal from a business standpoint, but my analysis indicates that Emily has the potential to revolutionize the corporate events market in New York City." "And if I accept," Emily said, looking him directly in the eye, "what exactly would your expectations be as an investor?" The question carried much more weight than it seemed on the surface, and David understood perfectly. "Purely professional expectations," he replied, keeping his gaze steady. "Quarterly reports, monthly follow-up meetings, financial returns commensurate with the investment. Nothing more." "And what if it doesn't work out? What if the company fails?" "Then I will lose $500,000, David said with a half smile. "I've lost more money on worse investments." Ms. Rosa and Mr. Antonio exchanged meaningful glances. It was impossible not to notice the unresolved tension between Emily and David, but it was also impossible to deny that this was a unique opportunity. "Emily," Ms. Rosa said gently, "may I have a word with you privately?" The two stepped into the small adjoining office, leaving David and Mr. Antonio discussing the legal aspects of the contract. "My daughter," Ms. Rosa said, "this man is not offering $500,000 because he only wants financial returns. Anyone can see that." "That's exactly why I can't accept," Emily replied. "I don't want to be a charity case. I don't want to be his personal project." "And what if it's not charity? What if he really is a man who believes in your potential?" Emily looked through the glass door at David, who was animatedly gesturing while explaining something to Mr. Antonio. Even discussing bureaucratic issues, he radiated a passion for work that she recognized in herself. "Ms. Rosa, he is complicated." "A man worth having is always complicated, my dear," the lady said with a maternal smile. "The question is whether you will let the fear of getting hurt prevent you from growing professionally." When they returned to the conference room, Emily had made her decision. "I accept," she said, "but with conditions." David raised an eyebrow. "What conditions?" "First, total financial transparency. I want access to all the numbers, all the spreadsheets, all the reports. Second, if at any point I want to dissolve the partnership, you will accept without question. Third, our relationship is strictly professional. Meetings in offices, written reports, no dinners or social gatherings." David listened to each condition without interrupting her, and Emily could see that he was carefully weighing the implications of each one. "I accept all the conditions," he finally said, "with one addition." "What?" "I want a protection clause for you as well. If you ever want to buy my share of the partnership, we will establish a fair price based on an independent valuation. Your independence will always be respected." The generosity of the counter-offer left Emily momentarily speechless. David was practically offering a guaranteed exit from the partnership, even if it meant a loss for him. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Because I trust you," David replied simply, "and because I want you to know that you will always have a choice." 3 weeks later, Emily was signing papers at a notary in downtown New York City, officially establishing Special Moments Events LLC, a name she chose in honor of her grandmother, who always said that life was made up of special moments that deserved to be celebrated properly. The company's first office was in a renovated townhouse in Brooklyn, a choice made by David that he justified as strategic for the target audience, but which Emily suspected had more sentimental motivations. She hired 3 employees: Julia, the waitress who had impressed her with her work at the Johnson and Partners party. Carlos, a recent graphic design graduate she had met at a job fair. And Monica, an experienced administrator who accepted a lower salary in exchange for profit sharing. During the first 3 months, Emily and David religiously maintained the professional protocols they had established. Bi-weekly meetings at the Brooklyn office, detailed reports sent via email, formal and distant communication. The company was growing rapidly. Within 6 months, it had organized 15 events and had a 2-month waiting list. But maintaining emotional distance from David was proving more difficult than Emily had anticipated. In the bi-weekly meetings, she found herself noticing small details, how he drummed his fingers on the table when he was focused, how his eyes lit up when she presented innovative ideas, how he always remembered to ask about Lily at the end of each meeting. "Emily," he said one autumn afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting, "may I ask a personal question?" Emily tensed immediately. "That depends on the question. How is Lily? The adjustment after the surgery?" The relief was so great that Emily almost laughed. "She is amazing, discovering new sounds every day. Yesterday she spent 15 minutes listening to classical music, completely fascinated." "What music?" "Vivaldi, The Four Seasons. It was one of my grandmother's favorites." David smiled, and for a moment the formality between them completely vanished. "Your grandmother had good taste." "She really did," Emily agreed, allowing herself to relax. "She always said that good music is like good food. It feeds the soul." "I would like to meet Lily someday," David said softly. "If you allow it, of course." The question caught Emily off guard. Throughout those months, she had carefully separated her personal life from her professional one, keeping David away from any contact with her daughter. But the way he asked, humble, respectful, without pressure, touched something deep in her heart. "Maybe," she finally said, "someday." It was a small but significant step forward. And as Emily drove home that afternoon, she allowed herself to think for the first time that perhaps, just perhaps, this business partnership could grow into something more. Something that, for the first time in years, she was not completely terrified to consider. June arrived in New York City, bringing the aroma of mulled wine and candied peanuts that filled the streets of the city. For Emily, this had always been her favorite month of the year. The summer festivals reminded her of. During her childhood, in a small town in Pennsylvania, when her grandma Anita would take her to dance at the summer festival in the town square and practice the traditional steps in their backyard. Special Moments Events, LLC, had been hired to organize a charity summer festival for the NGO Special Child, which served children with hearing and visual impairments. The event would take place in Central Park, in an area provided by the city, and all proceeds would go towards purchasing equipment and funding surgeries. "Emily, are you sure we can organize something of this magnitude?" asked Julia during a planning meeting. 3,000 people, 20 booths of typical foods, live shows. It's our biggest challenge yet. "It will work out," replied Emily, with a confidence that surprised even herself. "And it will be special, because it's for a cause that truly matters." Emily had personally gotten involved with the project after meeting the director of the NGO, Dr. Helen, a speech therapist who had dedicated 20 years of her life to helping children like Lily. When she learned that the organization was struggling to raise funds for state-of-the-art equipment, Emily offered to organize the event without charging fees, a decision she made without consulting David, later informing him via email that the company's profits that month would be reduced due to the pro bono work. His response came by phone an hour after the email was sent. "Emily, can we talk about the summer festival? If it's to question my decision not to charge for the organization, I already explained in the email that Emily, his voice gently interrupted her, I called to congratulate you on your initiative and to ask how I can help. The silence that followed was filled with her surprise. You want to help? Johnson and Partners has a social responsibility program that funds projects in pediatric health, explained David. I would like to propose that we cover all the sound and lighting equipment for the event. No advertising in return, no sponsorship signs, just because it's the right thing to do. Emily felt a strange emotion spreading through her chest. David, that must cost more than $20,000. Money is not a problem. The question is, do you accept the help? It was a question loaded with meaning. Throughout those months of business partnership, Emily had insisted on maintaining total independence, never asking for favors or accepting anything that seemed like personal charity. But this was different. It wasn't about her. It was about the children. I accept, she finally said. And thank you. Truly. There's one more thing, David continued, and Emily noticed a hesitation in his voice. Would you know if the NGO needs volunteers for the day of the event? Yes, it does. Why? Because I would like to volunteer. The response caught her completely off guard. You? Volunteering at a summer festival? Why is that so hard to believe? Emily thought about the question for a moment. The truth was that she still struggled to reconcile the image of the powerful CEO with that of the man who had helped carry equipment during the storm at the hotel, or who was now offering to work as a volunteer. It's not hard to believe, she said honestly. It's just unexpected. Emily, David's voice grew more serious. Do you still see me only as the rich man who can buy your independence? The question struck at the core of her insecurities. I don't know how to answer that. Then let me work alongside you on Saturday, as a volunteer, like any normal person who wants to contribute to a good cause. No hierarchies, no business complications. Just two adults trying to make a difference in the lives of some children. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the barriers she had built tremble dangerously. All right, but you're going to have to learn how to dance. His laughter on the other end of the line was genuine and warm. I think I can handle that. The Saturday of the summer festival dawned with a perfect blue sky, no clouds, with that mild temperature that New Yorkers love in winter. Emily arrived at Central Park at 6 in the morning, finding a small city of booths being set up by dozens of volunteers. She wore a traditional outfit she had specially made for the occasion. A flared blue cotton skirt with a floral pattern, a white peasant blouse, and braids in her hair adorned with colorful ribbons. It was the first time in years she had dressed so casually, and she felt strangely liberated. Emily! You look beautiful, exclaimed Dr. Helen when she spotted her. You look like a real country doll. Thank you, Doctor. How are the preparations going? Going perfectly. Your volunteers are amazing and the organization is impeccable. Oh, and a man came asking for you. He said he's from your company. Emily looked in the direction indicated by the doctor and barely recognized David. He was wearing a red and blue plaid shirt, faded jeans, and a slightly crumpled straw hat. He was helping to set up one of the game booths, carrying wooden boards with the ease of someone accustomed to physical labor. Good morning, she said, as she approached, trying to disguise how his casual appearance made him even more attractive. Good morning, he replied, stopping his work to look at her. Wow, you look beautiful. The simple and sincere compliment made Emily blush. Thank you. You also look different. In a good way, I hope. In a good way, she confirmed, smiling despite herself. Throughout the morning, Emily watched David work like any other volunteer. He set up booths, carried boxes, helped elderly people find seats in the food area, and chatted naturally with people of all ages and social classes. There was no condescension in his behavior, no sense that he was doing charity. He was simply there, contributing. "Emily," Julia said during a moment of pause, "your partner is interesting." "Why?" "I just saw him teaching a child in a wheelchair how to play ring toss. The girl was frustrated because she couldn't." He managed to hit the targets, and he spent 15 minutes showing different techniques until she was able to win a prize. Emily looked in the indicated direction and saw David kneeling next to the wheelchair of an 8-year-old girl, enthusiastically celebrating as she held a stuffed bear she had won in the game. "He's full of surprises," Emily murmured. The event officially began at noon, with a performance by the Three Kings celebration group from the NGO itself. The children served by the institution, many wearing hearing aids, danced and sang with a joy that moved the entire audience. Emily circulated around the event, supervising everything, but always keeping an eye on David. She saw him buying mulled wine at the booth run by Miss Constance. Her neighbour had offered to help when she learned about the project, participating in traditional games with an enthusiasm that seemed genuine, and chatting animatedly with parents of special needs children about the challenges and joys of inclusive parenting. It was during the square dance performance that everything changed. "Emily!" shouted the presenter from the stage. "We need one more couple to complete the dance. Who will volunteer?" Before Emily could protest, Dr. Helen gently pushed her toward the stage. "Go, dear. You know all the steps." "But I don't have a partner," Emily protested. "You do!" someone from the audience shouted, and David appeared by her side, extending his hand with a playful smile. "Trust me," he whispered. "I've practiced by watching videos on YouTube all week." The confession was so unexpectedly charming that Emily couldn't resist. She took his hand and let him guide her to the stage, where other couples were already positioning themselves for the dance. The music started, and David proved to be a terrible liar. He clearly didn't know the square dance steps, but what he lacked in technique, he made up for in enthusiasm and goodwill. When they reached the balance, he spun her in a completely incorrect way, but with so much charm that the audience applauded. During the dos et doch, he completely confused the steps and kissed her on the cheek, instead of performing the traditional greeting, provoking cheers from the crowd. "Look out for the rain!" shouted the presenter, and the most romantic square dance music began. David pulled Emily closer, vaguely following the rhythm of the music. "Sorry for not knowing how to dance properly," he murmured, his face dangerously close to hers. "You're doing really well," Emily replied, aware of how his scent, a mix of soap and something indefinably masculine, was affecting her concentration. "Emily," he said softly as they danced, "can I confess something?" "What?" "I didn't come here today just to volunteer." Emily's heart raced. "You didn't?" "I came because I wanted to see you happy. You shine when you work on causes you believe in." The sincerity in his voice, combined with their physical closeness and the magical atmosphere of the party, made all of Emily's defenses crumble instantly. "David," she whispered. "Yes?" "Thank you for everything, for believing in me, for respecting my limits, for being you." They stopped dancing, simply standing in the middle of the stage, while others continued the square dance around them. The music, the colorful lights, the sound of children laughing, everything faded into the background for that moment when Emily finally allowed David to see through all the barriers she had built. "Emily," he said, his thumb gently caressing her cheek, "can I kiss you?" Instead of answering, Emily leaned forward and kissed him first, to the enthusiastic applause of the audience who thought it was part of the performance. The kiss was soft, hesitant at first, then deeper, as they both allowed themselves to feel everything they had repressed for months. When they finally pulled away, Emily saw tears of happiness shining in his eyes. "I love you," David said simply, as if he could no longer hold those words back. "I love you too," Emily replied, finally admitting to herself what she had known for a long time. As they descended from the stage, hand in hand, Emily felt as if she were waking up from a long and confusing dream. There were still obstacles to overcome, still difficult conversations ahead about how to reconcile their different lives. But for the first time since she met David, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was eager to build it. The month that followed the summer festival was a time of delicate discoveries and careful adjustments. Emily and David began to explore their new reality as a couple, navigating between the passion they had finally admitted and the practical complexities of merging two very different lives. David insisted on getting to know Lily properly, no longer as the silent investor who politely inquired about her, but as the man who loved her mother and wanted to be part of their lives. The first meeting was carefully planned by Emily. A Saturday morning in Central Park, neutral territory where Lily felt comfortable. "She might be shy at first," Emily warned as they walked toward the playground. "Since the surgery, she's been more sensitive to new sounds, more attentive to unfamiliar people." "I'll let her set the pace," David promised, carrying a bag with snacks he had meticulously prepared: star-shaped peanut butter sandwiches, chopped fruit, and a sugar-free apple juice that Emily had mentioned was her daughter's favorite. Lily, at 2.5 years old, watched David with the intense curiosity typical of small children. She was wearing a yellow dress with a daisy print, and her first real ballet flats, a luxury that Emily could finally afford thanks to the success of the company. "Lily, this is David," Emily said, kneeling next to her daughter. "Remember I told you about Mommy's friend?" David knelt down as well, putting himself at the child's height. "Hi, Lily. Your mommy told me that you really like music." The little girl nodded solemnly, then pointed to her ear. In her ear was the small, virtually invisible hearing aid. "I can hear music now," she said, her pronunciation still uncertain but clear. "How wonderful," David replied with genuine admiration. "What music do you like the most?" "Vivaldi," Lily answered promptly, making David smile. Mom told me that. It's very beautiful music." During the 2 hours they spent in the park, Emily watched David interact with her daughter with a patience and naturalness that surprised her. He helped her on the slide, pushed the swing at just the right speed she liked, and when Lily accidentally spilled her juice, he cleaned it up without showing any annoyance. "David is nice," declared Lily when it was time to leave, waving goodbye to him with a shy gesture that made Emily's heart tighten. "She liked you," Emily said as they put Lily in the car. You fell in love with her," David replied, carefully adjusting the child's seatbelt. "Now I understand why you talk about her with such pride." But not everything was simple in the process of building their relationship. The differences between their worlds manifested in unexpected and sometimes painful ways. The first major crisis came 3 weeks after the party, during a dinner at David's house, the first time Emily visited his residence in the Upper East Side. The house was a modernist mansion with a pool, landscaped garden, and a spectacular view of the city, decorated with artworks that Emily recognized from the decor magazines she flipped through in medical offices. "It's beautiful," she said, trying to mask the discomfort she felt, realizing that this house alone was worth more than everything she would ever own in her life. "It's too big for just one person," David admitted, carefully observing her reaction. "Sometimes I think about selling it and buying something smaller, cozier." During dinner, prepared by a private chef David had hired for the occasion, the conversation flowed naturally until David mentioned a trip he had planned to New York City. "It's just a week, meetings with investors, but I was thinking, you and Lily might like to come along. It could be an early honeymoon. The offer, made with the best intentions, hit Emily like a punch in the stomach. David, a ticket to New York City costs more than my monthly salary. And that doesn't even include hotel, restaurants. I would pay for everything, of course, he said, genuinely confused by her reaction. I want to share these experiences with you. And what would I owe in return? Emily asked, her voice becoming tense. David stopped with his fork in the air, realizing he had touched on something very sensitive. You wouldn't owe anything. It would be a gift. David, Emily put down her utensils. You don't understand. I've spent my whole life fighting not to owe anything to anyone, not to be seen as someone who needs to be supported. But this is different. We're a couple. We've been a couple for 3 weeks, Emily exploded, and you already want to take me on international trips. How does that not seem suspicious to you? The ensuing discussion was tense and revealing. David tried to explain that he simply wanted to share his life with her, including the financial possibilities that life offered. Emily tried to make him understand that accepting large financial gestures made her feel diminished, dependent, just as she had felt when Rodrigo offered money to solve the pregnancy. Emily, David finally said, his voice heavy with frustration and sadness, I'm not him. I'm not the man who abandoned you. I know you're not, Emily replied, tears streaming down her face. But I need time to learn to truly believe that. They parted that night without resolving the issue, each struggling against different ghosts. David against the feeling that his money would always be a barrier between them. Emily against the fear of losing her hard-won independence. During the following week, they hardly spoke beyond what was strictly necessary for business matters. Emily immersed herself obsessively in work, organizing 3 simultaneous events with an efficiency that even impressed Julia. Emily, you need to talk to him, the employee said one Thursday afternoon. You both are miserable. It's not that simple, Ju. Of course it is. You love each other. Any blind person can see that. The rest are details that can be resolved with conversation. The reconciliation came unexpectedly. Emily was working late at the office when David appeared. At 10 o'clock, carrying 2 cups of coffee, made with the special blend she had taught him during one of their business meetings. Can I come in? He asked from the door. Emily nodded, watching him sit in the chair across from her desk. I've been thinking a lot about our discussion, he began, and I realized you were right. I was? Yes. I was trying to solve everything with money because it's easier for me. It's what I know how to do. But you're not a business problem that can be solved with investment. Emily watched him in silence, noticing how different he was. There was a humility in his posture that she had never seen before. David, let me finish, please. I cancelled the trip to New York City, not because you didn't want to go, but because I realized I was trying to rush our relationship by offering experiences I thought you would like, instead of building experiences that make sense for both of us. He leaned forward, his hands almost touching hers on the table. Emily, I grew up in a world where money solves most problems, but you taught me that some things, the most important ones, can't be bought. They take time, they take patience, they are built slowly. His words struck right at the center of the insecurities Emily had carried for so long. I was wrong too, she admitted. I projected fears onto you that had nothing to do with who you are. You never made me feel inferior or dependent. I was the one who interpreted your offers as threats to my independence. They talked until after midnight, establishing new boundaries and agreements. David would understand when Emily needed to pay her own share at restaurants or trips. Emily would try to accept genuine gestures of affection that did not compromise her autonomy. There's one thing I want to ask you, Emily said as they were getting ready to leave. Anything. I want to meet your family. David hesitated. Emily, my family is complicated. My father has very traditional ideas about social class, about who is suitable for a Johnson. Then it's time for him to meet someone who will challenge those ideas, Emily replied with a determination that David recognized and loved. Are you sure? Absolutely. If we're going to be together for real, I can't stay hidden from the important people in your life. David kissed her gently, feeling a mix of pride and concern. He knew that introducing Emily to his family would be a trial by fire, but he also knew she was right. If they wanted a future together, they would have to face all obstacles, including a 70-year-old patriarch who still believed that marriages were business deals meant to unite fortunes, not hearts. The following week, David called his father to arrange a family lunch on Sunday. It's going to be interesting, he told Emily the night before the meeting. It's going to be a start, she corrected, kissing him with a confidence that masked her own nerves. They both knew that the true test of their love was just beginning.